We are constantly surrounded by branding. Just glance around you right now. Logos emblazon nearly everything we touch. A drive down the street displays company colors on every corner. You might be willingly sporting someone's brand on your clothing right now. A strong brand is easy to recognize. It draws instant attention, lets a customer know what to expect, and builds trust. Brands create value for a company. You might be wondering how you can replicate the glorious golden arches or the subtle swoosh on a shoestring budget. While you might not be able to attain instant worldwide recognition like some of the major corporations without a team of branding experts backing you up, there are several principles you can apply to increase your presence and recognition. This is not designed to be strict rules or an all-inclusive guide. These are just a few items you can implement now to better position your business and your brand. As I said in the introduction, branding is really about consistency. There are 3 specific aspects that I want to mention when we talk about consistency. First is having a consistent message. Second is a consistent visual identity. And third is a consistent voice. So let's start out by talking about having a consistent message. This one might be the hardest to conceptualize. Consistent messaging comes from your identity as a company. This ties back to your mission, your vision, your values. Any message coming from your company needs to relate back to why your company exists and what is important to you. If your company strives to be a low-price option, then communicate affordability. If your business is built upon unique designs, then communicate individuality. If you have societal benefit built into your company mission, then speak to how your company is helping society. Your messaging should also come from your value proposition or unique selling proposition. If you have not watched our course on value propositions, now is probably a good time to go back and review. The value proposition is essentially why a customer would come to you instead of other competing products or services. Communicating value is mandatory to build a strong brand. For a consistent message, you also need to know who the intended audience is. If your target customer is families, but your messaging is touting individuality, you might be alienating current and potential customers. You need to be consistent, not only with who you are, but who your customers and desired customers are. There are many times you might want different messages going out at once. For example, one message might promote a new product while another is recruiting new team members. This is perfectly acceptable. The point is not to have only one message, but it is to make sure that everything you say is consistent with who you are as a company and the way that you want to be perceived by your customers. Next, let's talk a little bit about visual identity. This is probably the first area that comes to mind when you think of branding. And while this is the easiest to conceptualize, it is usually harder to implement than most businesses expect. First, I recommend a strong, professionally developed logo. Yes, I did say professionally developed. It can be tempting to let a family member who likes art create something for you. But solid logo design is more complicated than just the business name and fancy letters. Without getting into too much detail behind how logos should be created, let's just look at one simple aspect. Consider how the logo is going to be used in the future. Is it just online? Will you have the logo printed on shirts? How about embroidered on hats? Maybe you want it printed on small business cards or a large billboard. Well-designed logos can easily be adapted to all of these situations. If the use cases are not considered, you might have a logo that looks horrible in black and white or is too detailed to be clear when printed small on business cards. Once you have your logo, you need to use it consistently. Don't alter the colors, don't stretch it, don't skew it. Make sure it's on a clean and clear background so that it's not getting confused with everything else and visually competing. Some of the best companies go to extreme lengths to make sure that they protect that logo. I also recommend using a consistent color palette. There is a whole science to color and how customers respond. If you are interested, a quick online search will give you different studies on color and uses. For our purpose, I simply recommend that you pick a primary color palette and stick with it. This usually means 1 or 2 colors become the focal point, with 2 or 3 more as occasional accents. Use these same colors across all your online and physical pieces. Your brand will also benefit from consistent images. You could think about this in terms of both style and content. While there might be times you want to mix computer illustrations with photographs, usually it is best to stick with just one, especially if they'll be displayed next to each other. Having a cartoon-like sketch next to a full-color photo on your website often makes it seem disjointed. The same could be said for using very different photo filters on each social media post, or mixing realistic and abstract illustrations. For most businesses, you would be better served by viewing your brand images as a one artist exhibition as opposed to an entire art gallery. The last piece of your visual identity that I want to focus on is using consistent fonts. I strongly recommend using 1, maybe 2 fonts on everything you create. Try searching font pairings for inspiration. Many people have already done the research on what looks good together, so you don't have to spend too much time worrying about it. I do recommend that you pick fonts that are web safe, meaning they are likely to show consistently across different devices as people visit you online. This is something that I've run into as a frustration multiple times as I'm helping develop a website and we think it looks great, but then we get into maybe iPhone or on a particular web browser and find out that all of our fonts that we worked so hard on are completely missing and it just went back to a default. Picking web-safe fonts means you don't have to worry about that in the future. This is not an exhaustive list of visual identity elements. We could easily talk about layout, package design, or a number of other design things. This list, however, covers the basics you need to get started out in a good direction. The third piece I want to talk about when we talk about brand consistency is having a consistent voice. So think of messaging as what you say, and the voice is how you say it. When you have one person managing your online presence, this is much easier. But as more people start posting on company accounts and on behalf of the company, it can start to sound like individual people posting instead of one unified company. When you start to think through your voice, first of all, think about what tone you want to have. Do you want to sound professional and precise? Maybe you want to sound fun and exciting. There's so many different ways that you can take a tone of voice, but think of your company as a person that your customers are having a conversation with. Pick that tone and be consistent with it. The second thing I want to talk about is having a clear perspective. Are you coming at this from an individual owner perspective? Maybe it's from a mascot. Maybe you want to talk about team and we and the company as a whole. Make sure that you are using that voice consistently. You could also choose not to come from the first person, but go from a third person and always talk about the company. There are lots of different ways that you can do this, but I recommend that you are consistent throughout all of your posts, throughout all of your website, so that customers know who they are having a conversation with. The last thing I want to mention on having a consistent voice is terminology. If you are in B2B in a highly technical field, then it probably makes sense to use those highly technical terms. If you're reaching out to end consumers, using your industry jargon probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So use the terminology that your customer base is comfortable with. It makes it so much easier to have a conversation with you as a business. Being consistent in these three pieces, your messaging, your visual identity, and your voice, helps make sure that you are set up on a good foundation moving forward